All right, and welcome back to another U.S. History Online lesson. Today we're going to explore from neutrality to war, looking at how the United States gets involved in World War I. And as always, well, not as always, but as we've seen this unit so far, we're joined by my main man, Mr. Hoven.
Let's start looking at the question, was the U.S. entirely neutral in this conflict in Europe? Before jumping ahead, though, I just want to mention quickly that the U.S. at this time, the population is made up of a lot of immigrants, or sons and daughters of immigrants. And because of this, there are a lot of people that have different views on this conflict and how the U.S. should be involved, if at all.
That's true, and also to note is no one's really winning the war yet. The war is pretty much a stalemate, which means no one's winning.
And at the outset of this European conflict, President Wilson declared the U.S. neutral, and kind of that the war didn't concern America. However, there were definite reasons that we were depending on the outcome of what would happen in Europe.
That's for sure, and most of those reasons were economic reasons. So if you look at the numbers as what the U.S. was up to and how much they were trading with other countries, well, in 1914, they were trading about $824.8 million worth of goods to the Allied powers versus $169.3 million to the Central powers.
What a difference there.
It is. But then the difference really comes when you look a couple years later.
Oh, wow.
When the U.S. is trading about $3.2 billion worth of goods in loans to the Allied powers versus only $1.2 million with the Central powers. So while it skyrockets with the Allied, they actually decrease in the amount that they are trading or loaning to the Central powers.
Just make sure you notice that the difference between it's $3.2 billion.
Yeah, where the amount to the Central powers is $1.2 million.
So while this is going on, the British have kind of formed a blockade, a naval blockade around Germany, which kept some supplies getting to Germany. And so therefore that explains somewhat a very small portion of the difference between aid that was going to the Allied and Central powers. Because of this blockade, the Germans had to find a way around it or to break through it. And they came up with this newer technology, which were German submarines. And they had an interesting name, didn't they?
Unterseeboats, known as U-boats. They would use these U-boats to torpedo the British ships that were blockading them and would eventually sink them. However, the problems would come when Germany starts sinking ships containing war goods that belong to the Allied powers. They will do this, and this will cause the U.S. to kind of get a little tense because they believe in what's called the freedom of the seas. They ask Germany not to, and Germany, in what is known as the Sussex Pledge, promises to stop with these U-boat attacks on these ships. But do they keep their promise?
No, they do not. And that's the one thing that's very interesting, that U.S. ships were still being attacked, and Germans pledged that any ship entering or leaving an Allied port in Europe would be torpedoed.
So on May 7th, 1915, a U-boat would sink a British liner known as the Lusitania without any warning whatsoever.
At the time now, was this a warship transporting goods anywhere?
See, that's a great question. It was actually a passenger ship, but the Germans will insist that there are war goods on board. 1,198 people will die. Here's the catch. 128 of them are Americans.
Americans.
And this will cause many in America to start to clamor for a war against Germany and the Central powers. But the attack on the Lusitania itself did not convince Woodrow Wilson to ask Congress to declare war. He still wanted to stay out of this conflict. He didn't think that we were ready for it. Well, at the same time, Britain really wants us to come in on their side. But another thing will tip the scales of the U.S. involvement. Germany will send a telegram to Mexico in which they will basically ask the Mexicans to attack the United States. And in return, Germany says that they will give the Mexicans land that they had lost in the Mexican-American War.
And that was the southwest portion of the United States, which includes present-day Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico.
That's right, going back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. So this is known as the Zimmerman Telegram, and it will be sent in January of 1917. But the catch is the message is intercepted by the British. And they are able to decode the message and give it to the United States and say, look, Germany really wants you to be attacked. Shouldn't you come in the war against them?
So because of this Zimmerman telegram, Wilson really has to begin, President Wilson that is, has to really begin weighing his options. Because after the Lusitania, that still wasn't enough. He still wanted to maintain a policy of neutrality or not getting involved directly with fighting or any of the battles. However, with this telegram, he starts beginning to weigh the pros versus the cons. Some of the pros were many Americans were outraged by this submarine warfare. Many Americans favor Britain and France. The Zimmerman telegram, of course, angers America, and the Allies is growing. The trade with the Allies, that is growing.
That's right. Americans are making a lot of money off of that trade. And Americans want to collect on loans made to France and Britain, which will not happen if they lose the war. But the cons. There are many cons to going to war. In fact, the United States had maintained this tradition of neutrality. They'd be going against that. Some Americans actually sympathized with the Central Powers. There was a good deal of anti-English sentiment in America. And Wilson opposes the alliance with the Russian Tsar, which if he entered the war on the side of Britain and France, he would be on the side of the Russian Tsar. And then lastly, there was quite a significant number of pacifists who are saying we shouldn't enter the war. Well, there are war hawks who are saying, let's go, let's get into this.
Get it on!
So Wilson has a tough decision to make.
So in March 1917, after the German U-boats sink more ships and break that pledge, the Sussex pledge that they had with the United States, Wilson is given no other option but to declare war.
Because there was such a growing anti-German feeling in the United States, can Wilson declare war all by himself?
No, he cannot. He needs approval of Congress.
And that's exactly what happens. On April 6, 1917, Congress will declare war on Germany. And the U.S. enters World War I.
Dun, dun, dun.
We will continue that next time. Goodbye.